Welcome. In this tutorial we are going to learn about Traceback modules, which provides functions to extract, format and print stack traces of exception. So in previous section we saw exceptions. So if we try to print exception, it will print the exception message, and if we take REPR of E, it will print the constructor with its message, but it does not print stack trace like this when an exception goes unhandled. So if you want to access the same stack trace programmatically, or if you want to store that stack trace to file, we can use Traceback module and its function. So first we will understand the exception object's structure. So as we can see in this diagram, it contains Traceback object, and Traceback object contains frame object. So whole Traceback object captures the exception details inside it. So it can be later printed or it can be formatted into the different formats. So using this Traceback object, which is stored inside the exception object, we can print the traceback. So same traceback object is used by the function which is provided by the Traceback module. So first we will access the traceback and the frame object of a exception. So here we are raising exception and we are storing inside the variable E. So, and first we will check the class of the exception, which will be printed as a zero division error. Exception object is having args attribute, which will return a tuple object containing all the argument which is provided to the constructor. To access the traceback object, we can access using special attribute traceback. So it will return the memory address of a traceback object, and if we traverse further and we access frame object from the traceback object, it will print the object type as a frame. So same structure can be accessed using sys module's exec_info function, which will return the information about most recent exception. So it will return a tuple object containing three values. First one is exec type, which will contain the class of the exception which is raised, exec value, which will print the message, and exec traceback, which will return the same traceback object that we can access with the traceback attribute. So let's execute it and see the result. So here the class of exception is zero division error. Value if args 0, which means first argument is a message, so this is zero division by error. And if we try to access traceback, it will give you the reference of it, and if we check the type of it, it is type of traceback object. And if we try to access TB frame, it is a type of frame object. So here we can see the object structure in which the traceback information is stored. So same information we can get using sys.exec_info. So exec type, which it is printing the exception class, exec value, it is printing the message, and exec traceback, it is pointing to same traceback object which is captured by variable E, and its type is traceback. So using this object we can also traverse to the frame object. So traceback module provides function to extract that traceback information, so we don't need to manually traverse it. So we will begin with the functions. First function is print TB, which prints the stack trace entries from the traceback object TB. It takes two optional arguments. First one is a limit, by default it is set to none, which prints all the stack trace entries, and if it is given positive number, it limits the number of entries to be printed, and if it is given negative number, it takes limit as an absolute value of a given number. And next argument is a file, which is by default set to none, which redirects the stack trace to the std error, and it can be given value as a file like object. So here if we are giving a file object, the traceback information will be stored to the file, or if we are providing here std out, so same traceback will be printed on the std out instead of std error. So let's print the traceback. So here we will extract the exception info using sys module, and we will extract the traceback from it, and we will pass to the print tb. Here we are not providing any argument, so it will redirect the stack trace to the std error. Okay, let's execute it. As you can see, std error, it is printing in red. Okay, and it is not breaking the execution sequence. As you can see here, the statements after the try block is getting executed. Now we will redirect the output to the standard output instead of printing to the standard error. So here we will provide file argument as a sys.stdout. Here still we are providing the traceback object extracted from the sys.exec.info. So as you can see, the same traceback is printed at the std out, and this is the same information extracted using sys.exec.info. Next method is print exception, which takes 3 mandatory argument which can be extracted same as using sys.exec.info. Next one is limit, which is having same meaning as we saw earlier. File, it takes file like object, and chain, it is by default equal to true, which prints cause and context attribute of a chained exception as we saw for the in the exception module. Okay, and if we compare it with print tb, it prints the exception e type and value after the stack trace, and it print the traceback line. So earlier we saw it is not printing a statement like traceback as we saw for the normal traceback object. So with print exception, it will print that line traceback, and if it is a syntax error, it will give value pointing the error at which line it is causing the syntax error. So let's print the exception. So here we have extracted 3 values and providing 3 values, and we are redirecting the output to the standard output. So if we run it, as you can see, it is printing the traceback line, and after it is printing the type of error and its message. It is same as a traceback which is printed when exception goes unhandled. So here, instead of storing this into the 3 variable, we can directly use sys.exec.info and unpack the tuple object written by it. So if you execute it, it will print same exception to the standard error. And if you provide here file as std out, it will print the same message to standard output. And if we are having syntax error, it will print symbol like this, showing the line at which the syntax error is occurred. Next function is format exception. It takes 3 mandatory argument as same as we saw earlier. Limit, it is having same meaning. Chain is also having same meaning. It returns the list of formatted string, each string containing stack trace and exception information. So let's print the format exception. So here we are providing the information using this tuple object with sequence unpacking. So it returns the list of strings containing stack trace information instead of printing those lines. So we can format this line according to our native format instead of just printing out to the standard output or directly redirecting the output to the file. Next function is format exception only. Returns the list of formatted string containing exception type and value from the traceback. So for normal exception, it returns a string, single string, but if it is syntax error, it contains several lines. So here, if we print format exception only for normal exception, as you can see, it is only giving us the error and its message as a string. But it is, if it is syntax error, it will give you more than one line. Next function is print exec. It takes limit, file and chain as an optional argument, and it is a shorthand for print exception. So here we were manually providing these parameters. So with print exc, we don't need to explicitly provide those argument. We just provide if optional argument limit, file or chain it is required. Okay, so here we just want to redirect the traceback to the standard output. So it will fetch the exception information from exec info and it will redirect that output to the standard output. We don't need to extract information out of it explicitly. So print exec is a method which can be used to print or redirect the traceback of given exception. Next function is format exec. It is perform same as print exec but return the string instead of printing the output to the file or the standard output. So earlier we were redirecting whatever output to the file or the any of the output stream. Instead of that, it returns the string. So format exec if you want to capture the stack trace programmatically. So here it is returned as a string and it is printed on the standard output using print statement. Next function is print last. it is a shorthand for print exception, and it only works after the exception is reached to interactive prompt. So if we have an exception which went uncaught, and if we want to print the last exception raised, we can use print last. So if we execute it, as we can see here, it will print the same last exception to the given file. So here we are redirecting the output to the standard output. Okay. Next function is print stack. It prints the stack trace entries. So it has same limit and file argument. The new argument is f, which specifies an alternate stack trace frame to start. So if we print the stack using print stack, here we are executing inside the function. So it will print where it is called and all other information. So if we execute it, as you can see, first it is beginning from line 12. So here the function which produces the exception is called here. Then it execute the exception line at line number 9. Okay. So if the function has multiple caller, or it is passing the sequence into the multiple function call, so it will print all the function call with this print stack. Next function is extract tb. Returns the stack summary object representing list of frame summary objects extracted from the traceback object. So from traceback object it will return the frame summary object, and limit has same meaning as we saw earlier. So here function 1 is calling function 2, which is producing an error, and here within the try block we are calling the function 1. And if we extract the traceback into the frame summary object, and we are printing each frame summary object returned by the extract tb. So here, as you can see in output, it is returning frame summary object, which is 3 object. So first, if we can see, first the function is called from the line 23. So it is containing first frame, which is capturing detail about line 23. Then it is calling function 2 from line 11. So this is the second frame summary, which is capturing detail about line 11, and next line or next frame summary is at line 19, where the exception is raised. So it will contain all the information about the stack trace in the frame summary objects. Next function is format list. It returns the list of string from the list of tuple or the frame summary object. So here we are extracting frame summary objects, and from frame summary we can extract the list of string using format list. So same extracted list using extract tb we are providing inside the format list function. So it will return the list of string instead of frame summary object. Next function is format TB. It is shorthand for the same format list extract TB. So instead of calling two function, we can only execute one format TB, and here we can provide a traceback object which will return list of string extracted from the frame summary object. Next function is extract stack, which extract the raw stack traceback from the current stack frame and returns the value same as the extract TB. So if we execute it, it will return the frame summary object which is containing the stack trace information about the exception object. And next one is format stack, which is a shorthand for format list extract stack. So it will return list of string. Okay, so same list of same frame summary object is converted into the string, which captures the raw traceback from the current stack frame. And last function is clear frames, which clears the local variable of all stack frames in a traceback TB by calling clear method of each frame object. So frame object also contains information about the local variables. So it is cleared frame by frame inside the traceback object. So that brings us to end of the video.